Cafe. Glenn, nice to meet you. This is Jenny. Yeah. Not too bad. Okay.
In some seats, like this one on the New South Wales Central Coast, the Prime Minister is fighting the election at a grassroots local level.
And is that just a marketing gimmick, or does that work?
At the weekend, he pledged $20 million for facilities such as boat ramps, wharves and campsites.
Well, better go and ring up the register.
But avoided big-picture questions about a security pact that poses a potential threat right on the nation's doorstep.
Why won't you talk to us about national security?
It was only the next day, while campaigning in the Red Centre, that he suddenly ramped up his rhetoric, talking about red lines.
I share the same red line that the United States has when it comes to these issues.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we won't be having Chinese military naval bases in our region on our doorstep.
The deal between the Solomon Islands and Beijing poses two competing challenges for the Prime Minister, and he'd initially talked down the impact of it and tried to stress the closeness of our Pacific family. On the one hand, Scott Morrison doesn't want to offend the government in Honiara by being seen to try to tell them what to do. On the other, he's also trying to win an election by convincing voters he is best placed to manage Australia's national security, and this agreement, if it leads to a base, would seem to undermine that argument.
This security agreement comes just days before a top American diplomat was sent to visit the Solomon Islands.
The Biden administration is also unhappy with how this has all been handled. After a visit to the Solomons by top security advisor Kurt Campbell on Friday, the White House warned any steps towards a de facto permanent military presence, power projection capabilities or a military installation would give the US significant concerns and cause it to respond accordingly.
Well, the term red line, I think, has a somewhat checkered past in the sense that President Obama used the term in relation to the threat of Syrian use of chemical weapons. And when the Syrians went ahead and used chemical weapons on a large scale, there was no response. So there is always this risk in declaring a red line that you must then be seen to enforce it or lose credibility.
It's unclear what Australia could or would do if our red line is crossed in the Solomons, but military intervention is thought to be unlikely.
So no one's talking about bombing the Solomon Islands or invading the Solomon Islands. I think that the use of the term red line is unfortunate, but I think a Chinese base in the Solomon Islands would be a fundamental game-changing moment for our defence and security for one very simple reason. It would basically mean that for the first time since the end of the Second World War, the eastern seaboard of Australia would be open to threat in a war situation where we're facing the Chinese.
An arc of autocracy is challenging the rules-based order our grandparents had secured.
The uncertain security situation around the world filtered into today's Anzac Day commemorations.
Lest we forget.
The Defence Minister comparing Russian President Vladimir Putin to Adolf Hitler and again suggesting China was on a similar aggressive path to Nazi Germany in the 1930s.
The only way that you can preserve peace is to prepare for war and to be strong.
Words are one thing, action is another. This is a government which beats its chest. But when it comes to actually delivering and doing what needs to be done, this is a government which repeatedly fails.
With all the increasingly heated rhetoric flying around, it's worth reflecting just how much Australia's approach to China has shifted in recent years. A decade ago, both major parties spoke about opportunities to strengthen ties with our largest trading partner. Now, some links to Beijing are seen as a liability.
We got another Manchurian cat.
In February, the government accused Deputy Opposition Leader Richard Marles, without any real evidence, of being a Chinese puppet. And now ministers are again scrutinising a speech he gave 3 years ago to a Beijing-based university.
His startling comments and approach to China show a real national security concern should the Labor Party be elected.
The assertion that's being made by the government is just another desperate attempt to divert from their failings in the Pacific.
What do we know about Liberal Gladys Liu?
On the other side, an attack ad is also circulating targeting Melbourne Liberal MP Gladys Liu, who holds her seat of Chisholm on a razor-thin margin of 0.5%.
Let's call it for what it is. A desperate, dishonest, racist attack ad by the Labor Party.
Is the Labor Party at risk of vilifying Chinese Australians?
You're asking me that question. A number of these issues were raised a few years ago in the Parliament, I think there were questions that she should have answered then, and it's legitimate for those to be answered.
Tomorrow, Labor will unveil how it plans to make Australia the first partner of choice for our Pacific neighbours if it wins office, including by boosting Australian broadcasting to the region. But many academics believe some of the language being used in the heat of a campaign, like talk of red lines or discussion about how this deal could have been stopped, is not particularly helpful.
It fails to sufficiently recognise the agency of Pacific states, and it suggests a degree of distrust.
Pacific Islands researcher Anna Poles brought the Solomon deal to global attention by tweeting the leaked draft last month. She believes much more attention needs to be paid to the many different regional leaders in the Solomons who oppose the deal, not just the Prime Minister in Honiara, particularly when it comes to discussing infrastructure and aid projects.
Arguably, insufficient time has been spent in the region by Australian and New Zealand officials to build those relationships so that when it matters, like right now, those relationships are there and can be drawn upon, and that's very much lacking.
Those relationships could be key to ensuring Australia's future security in the broader region, though they are difficult to build during the middle of an election campaign. It's a job for whoever wins in May when this race is done and won.
Cheers, everyone.
Hi, I'm Lee Sales. Thanks for watching this story. If you'd like to watch more of 730's stories, they are on the left of your screen. And tap on the button below to subscribe and get the latest from ABC News.